Maple and Vine. Cafe. Early morning. January 10th. It happened just before sunrise. The crash of metal on tile, the scatter of ceramic shards, and a half-burnt scent of cinnamon filled the cafe like a fire alarm. A tray of apple pies had hit the floor hard. Steam hissed into the cold morning air, and then came her voice. Sharp, cutting, unforgiving, wonderful. That's what I needed today. A floor full of sugar and stupidity. Chatter stopped. Spoons froze mid-air. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. At table number 3, the old woman with silver hair and storm-gray eyes tightened her scarf as if bracing for another kind of cold. Her name was Maggie. She came every Tuesday and Friday, always sat at the same table, always ordered the same pie, and always carried a mood that could slice marble. No one approached her. Ever. Except one man. From behind the swinging service door near the back, Evan Cole stepped forward, tall, steady, with boots that echoed softly against the tile. His dark navy shirt still bore a faint bleach stain near the collar. Facilities services. Night shift stitched above his heart. He didn't say a word. He just bent down and began cleaning up the mess. Bare hands, careful grip, quiet heart. He worked like someone who had done this 1,000 times. Because he had. From behind the counter, Sam, the young barista, winced. Shoot, that tray was still hot. You okay, man? Evan gave a small shrug, eyes still on the shattered mess. Won't be the worst burn I've had this week. A few customers chuckled nervously. But Maggie didn't move. She just stared at him, arms folded, her pie now a pile of ruined slices and heat. When Evan finished gathering the last of the ceramic, he wiped the floor slowly with a cloth pulled from his back pocket. Then he looked up at her calm, unbothered, like her anger was just another spill to mop. "I'll bring you another slice," he said, voice soft but sure, hotter than this one. Maggie blinked. Her scowl stayed, but something in her jaw relaxed. Evan stood, walked to the counter, pulled out his wallet, and paid for the pie himself. "Don't put it on the tab," he said to Sam. "It's from me." He returned to table 3 and placed the new slice gently on the table, steam rising like a little offering to the morning. "On the house," he said. "Well, my house, technically." The corner of Maggie's mouth twitched, a wince. A ghost of something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been buried for years. The moment passed. She picked up her fork, took a slow bite. Outside, the gray January light had begun to filter through the condensation-frosted windows. Just past 6:45 a.m. and the sky still looked like dusk. Rain drizzled lightly on the sidewalk, tapping against the glass like a tired metronome. Evan turned to leave, but paused by the door. Something caught his eye, wedged near the frame, half-soaked from the rain. A sheet of paper, thin, bleeding ink. He tugged it free and gave it a once-over. Notice of sale. Pending review, Maple and Vine Cafe. Proposal to terminate lease effective Q2. His jaw clenched. He folded it in half and slipped it into his jacket without a word. Then he walked to the back closet where he kept his gear, his mop, his tools, his half-limp folding chair. Sometimes when his daughter Maisie was with him before school, they'd sit there and share a muffin in silence. The cafe's quiet rhythm returned. Dishes clinked, milk steamed, conversations restarted. At just past 7, Azur Su, Evan peeked again toward table 3. Maggie hadn't left. She was still sitting there, hands wrapped around the plate like it was a cup of warmth. She wasn't smiling, but the furrow between her brows had softened. For the first time in weeks, her breathing looked steady. He checked his watch. If he hurried, he'd make it home in time to walk Maisie to the corner for the school bus. But something tugged at him. A sense of unfinished work. He stepped back toward the counter and slid a $10 bill toward Sam. "For tomorrow," he said. Sam tilted his head. "Another slice for the old lady?" Evan nodded. "Just in case she comes back." The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped out into the drizzle, coffee in hand boots soaking up the puddles like sponges. He didn't look back this time. But inside, Table 3 now held more than just pie. It held a question, a whisper of something like care, and somewhere far above their heads a security camera blinked silently, a small red light flashing inside the ceiling. Watching, recording, remembering. The smell of cinnamon arrived before the door even opened. It was the kind of scent that wrapped itself around the morning like a blanket, sweet, earthy familiar. The cafe was still quiet, a soft jazz melody drifting from the corner speaker. Outside, frost clung to the windows, turning the world a shade paler. Just after the usual rush of deliveries, Evan Cole stood behind the counter carefully plating a slice of apple pie. He didn't rush. He never did. With practiced calm, he used a butter knife to gently cut the slice into 6 smaller pieces, just enough for someone with trembling hands to manage without dropping a bite. Behind him, Sam poured the first batch of brewed coffee and asked, "She's here again?" Evan nodded. "Third time this week. She ever say why she keeps coming back?" He gave a quiet shrug. "Some people don't need a reason, they just need a place." At that moment, the bell above the door gave its signature chime. Maggie stepped in with slow, deliberate steps, her heavy coat still buttoned all the way up despite the heater humming above her. She paused at the entrance, scanning the room with tired, expectant eyes before moving wordlessly toward Table 3, like always. Evan met her there, setting down the warmed plate in front of the empty chair. He offered a soft nod toward the pie. "Cut smaller today," he said, "so it doesn't fight back." She didn't laugh, but she sat down, and somehow that felt like a win. She stared at the pie, not touching it yet, as if waiting for something or someone. Evan turned to leave, but her voice, soft and unsure, stopped him. "Is he coming?" He turned back. "Who Maggie didn't look up?" "My husband. He used to meet me here. Tuesdays. I was always late. He never minded." Evan rested a hand on the back of the chair across from her. "I don't know, ma'am," he said gently, "but just in case," he motioned to the empty seat, "we saved it." Maggie glanced at the chair, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. "He always said the pie tasted like the holidays," she murmured, "even in July." Evan smiled faintly. "Then I'll make sure the cinnamon's strong." A little while later, the quiet rhythm of the cafe shifted as tiny footsteps pattered across the floor. Maisie had just arrived, bundled in her purple coat, with her oversized backpack bobbing behind her. 6 years old, bright-eyed, and already carrying a folded piece of paper in both hands like a sacred offering. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging at Evan's sleeve. "Can I give it to her now?" He looked down, then over at Maggie, still staring at the pie untouched. "You sure she won't be mad?" he asked. Maisie nodded solemnly. "It's a kindness picture. Miss Ray says everyone needs one." And before he could say another word, Maisie made her way to Table 3 with quiet purpose. "Hi," she said softly. Maggie looked up, startled. Her eyes scanned the little girl, then the paper she held out. "I made this," Maisie explained. "It's you, with the pie, and the table. I don't know your name, but you look like someone who remembers things." Maggie blinked. Her hand moved slow and cautious, as if reaching for something fragile. She took the drawing as if it might vanish the moment she touched it. The crayon lines were messy but unmistakable: an old woman, a slice of pie, a round table by a window, and a smiling girl handing her something warm. The silence stretched long enough for Evan to hold his breath. Then, just barely, Maggie smiled. Not the kind of smile you'd see on a holiday card, just a small curve of the lips. Gentle, earned. Maisie grinned. "I hope you like it. You're important." Then, as easily as she'd arrived, she turned and skipped back toward her dad, already pulling a juice box from her backpack like nothing had happened. Maggie stared at the drawing a moment longer, then set it gently beside her pie. Her hand trembled, but it rested still. Evan returned with a clean napkin, placing it beside her hand. "She's got a soft heart," he said. Maggie nodded slowly. "She's got a warm one." And for the first time since the burning tray incident, Maggie lifted her fork without hesitation. One bite, then another. The scent of cinnamon lifted into the air, filling the space between them like a memory. By the time the cafe had begun to fill with its usual early birds and the light through the windows had shifted from gray to gold, Evan found himself back behind the counter. Sam leaned in and lowered his voice. "You hear anything about the notice?" Evan looked up alert. "What notice?" "One of the delivery guys said the building's getting appraised," Sam muttered. "Said it's already listed. They might be selling this place." Evan's hand stilled over the stack of clean plates. "Selling Maple and Vine." Sam nodded, eyes scanning the room. "Looks like it. Whole block's under review. Developers are sniffing around." Evan's eyes drifted to table 3. Maggie was folding the drawing slow and careful like it was worth more than the pie. She tucked it into her coat pocket with a kind of reverence. Her fingers lingered there, holding it. Holding on. Evan turned back to Sam, his voice low but firm. "If that's true, they're not just closing a cafe. They're erasing a place that remembers." Sam didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The cafe hummed on. Blenders, soft voices, quiet songs. But beneath it all, something deeper settled in the space between the tables. A question. A quiet ache. And Evan, towel in hand, stared back toward the place where Maggie had smiled, and wondered how many stories would be lost if no one stayed to remember. The hum of the monitors filled the room like a soft engine. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The air felt cooler than it needed to be too sterile for a February morning. A mug of untouched tea sat beside the keyboard, steam long gone. Olivia Hart didn't touch it. She sat in front of the central control station of the Hart Property Holdings Surveillance Hub, what her team called the glass box. 10 screens in a row, quiet feeds from multiple properties across the city. Cafes, courtyards, hallways, loading docks. Most of it uneventful, just people living ordinary lives under grainy watch. But her eyes were fixed on the top right screen. Maple and Vine, interior, angle 3, facing window seating. Timestamp, February 10th, 6:43 a.m. A subtle rewind. She dragged the cursor back a few seconds and clicked. The image flickered slightly, then cleared. A tall man in a maintenance uniform approached table 3 with something in his hands. Olivia leaned closer, elbows resting on the desk. The footage played without sound, just movement and the usual timestamp ticking forward. The man Evan, she'd confirmed, bent slightly, setting down a plate of pie. He said something. The old woman at the table didn't respond right away. But then, she did. A blink, a lift of the fork, and there it was. A smile. Brief, barely more than a flicker, but real. Olivia's hand hovered near her face, not quite touching her cheek, her breath hitching just slightly. It had been a long time since she'd seen her mother smile like that. Even longer since she'd seen it without force, without prompting, without performance. The camera, positioned high and angled just enough, had captured something neither scripted nor seen before, kindness exchanged between two strangers. And Maggie Hart, her brilliant, bitter, stubborn mother, had smiled because of it. Olivia clicked pause. The image froze on Maggie's face, mid-lift, steam rising in front of her pie, halfway to her mouth, the drawing from the little girl still on the table beside her. Without thinking, Olivia reached toward the small stack of printer paper nearby. From a separate screen, she navigated into the system archive and pulled the corresponding receipt logs for that morning's cafe transactions. 3 items. 1 coffee, 1 juice, 1 slice of apple pie paid in cash, logged to no employee account. She printed it. The page slid from the printer, warm and faintly curled. Olivia took it in both hands. Scanned the bottom line. 475-641. AM cash, no tip required. Her eyes lingered on the handwritten note the cashier had scribbled beside it. Janitor paid Reg 2. She folded the receipt once, then again, then tucked it into a thin leather binder resting beside her. Inside the binder were pages not of balance sheets or contracts, but of moments. Photographs, menu scraps, her father's doodles from napkins long ago, letters she never sent, mementos her mother no longer remembered asking to keep. Olivia slid the receipt beneath a clipping of a restaurant review from 1987, the first time Maple and Vine had made the paper. She paused, then shut the binder softly. An hour passed, and the office slowly stirred behind her keyboards, clicking doors opening and closing, muffled voices from early meetings starting on adjacent floors. But Olivia remained in the chair, watching, rewinding, fast-forwarding, pausing at the same frame again. Maggie. Table 3. That small, hard-won smile. A manager knocked lightly on the glass. Olivia turned, nodded once, then returned her gaze to the paused feed. In that moment, she wasn't CEO. She was a daughter, watching her mother become human again for just a second. She hit play one last time. Evan could be seen wiping the table after Maggie left, folding the napkin, gently tucking the drawing the girl had forgotten into a clear bag and handing it to the barista with a small gesture that clearly meant, "Keep it safe." Then he exited the frame. The bell above the door jingled. Maggie was already gone. But something had stayed behind. Later that afternoon, Olivia passed through the ground floor of the building and paused by the service elevator where the maintenance log was posted. Evan's name was still on the rotation sheet overnight shift, alternating buildings 3 nights a week at Maple and Vine. She took out her phone, hovered over the operations HR contact, then stopped. Not yet. This wasn't about contracts or evaluations or business strategy. This was about watching a stranger show kindness no one asked for, and no one expected. She returned the phone to her coat pocket and walked on heels, tapping against marble the binder tucked beneath one arm. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not the board, not her team, not even Maggie. But somewhere deep down a decision had begun to stir. A question had landed and lodged itself like an ember. What if places like Maple and Vine weren't dying? What if they were simply waiting? For someone to remember what they're for. As the elevator doors closed, Olivia rested her hand on the binder and whispered something so quiet it barely reached the steel. "You smiled, Mom." "I saw it." The pie was still warm when he set it down. Same table, same plate, same cinnamon swirl baked into the golden crust. No one sat across from it. Evan didn't say anything he never did on mornings like this. He just placed the slice at table 3, adjusted the fork so it pointed east like always, and walked away. The chair stayed empty. It had been empty for days now. Maggie hadn't shown up on March 3rd, or the 5th, or today. The routine had been broken, but Evan kept it anyway. Something in him refused to let the rhythm die. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was hope. By now, Sam didn't even question it. He just wrapped the pie before dawn, handed it over, and nodded once. "She's not coming today either," he said quietly as Evan passed the counter. "I know," Evan replied. Still he placed the plate down. Still he wiped the table gently when the pie grew cold. And still, every time he looked at that chair, something inside him whispered, "Not yet." The week passed with a strange kind of stillness. Mornings came. Pie was plated. Table 3 waited in silence. Maisie asked once, "Is the pie lonely when the lady doesn't come?" Evan smiled. "No, sweetie. The pie's just patient." She nodded like it made perfect sense. On the morning of March 14th, the light through the window had a different tone, sharper, clearer, as if spring had finally remembered to arrive. Evan stepped into the cafe just after opening, carried the pie like always, and placed it on table 3. And just as he turned to leave, the bell above the door rang. Not once, not twice, but in rapid succession. 3 people entered, 2 men in tailored suits and 1 woman between them. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a dark blazer and matching slacks. Sharp lines, hair pinned back, eyes alert and observant. It was Olivia. Evan didn't recognize her at first, but something in her posture made him pause. She scanned the cafe quickly, eyes landing on table 3 and the untouched slice of pie. "Excuse me," she said, approaching. "Are you the one who keeps placing that there?" Evan hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. You work here, I clean here." She folded her arms not defensively but like someone carrying a thought too heavy to let drop. "Then why keep putting pie on a table no one sits at?" Evan looked at her for a long second before answering. "Because maybe one day she'll remember the way." That stopped her, not completely, but enough to shift something in her expression like a wall inside her had just been tapped and a tiny crack appeared. He continued quietly. "You never know what might bring someone back. Smell, sound, taste. Sometimes it's not about the person forgetting. It's about the world remembering for them." Olivia didn't speak for a moment. The two suited men glanced at each other, unsure whether to interrupt. She held up a hand, silencing them, then turned back to Evan. "Do you know who that chair belongs to?" "I don't need to," Evan said. "I just know someone once felt safe there." Something in his answer undid her just slightly. She glanced toward the pie again, then at the empty seat, then back at him. "Come with me," she said. Evan blinked. "I'm sorry." She pulled a business card from her pocket and held it out. "Get your jacket. I want to tell you a few things. About the woman who used to sit here." Evan took the card, slowly reading the gold lettering. Olivia Hart, Managing Director, Hart Urban Trust. He looked up. "Wait, Hart. As in, yes," she said. "As in the name behind this entire block." She turned toward the door. The two men followed without a word. Then she paused, looked over her shoulder and said, "Well, are you coming?" Evan glanced back at the table, at the still steaming pie, at the chair that had waited so long, and then down at the drawing Maisie had redone yesterday, still tucked inside his tool bag. He folded it gently, slid it into his coat pocket, and nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "Lead the way." And with that he stepped outside, not knowing the story he was about to hear. Would rewrite everything he thought he understood about kindness, memory, and the woman behind the silence. The car was too quiet. No radio, no idle chatter, just the low hum of tires against asphalt and the faint tapping of rain beginning to gather on the windows. Evan sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV, his hands resting awkwardly on his lap. The leather felt unfamiliar beneath his palms, cleaner than anything he owned. Across from him, Olivia Hart stared straight ahead, posture rigid, lips pressed into a line. Her driver knew better than to speak. The suited men from the cafe had been dropped off at the next corner. Now it was just the two of them. Evan cleared his throat softly. "So, where are we going?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she pulled a small folder from her bag and laid it across her knees. Her voice came a moment later, quieter than he expected. "You placed that pie on table 3. How many times?" He blinked. Honestly lost count. "I wasn't doing it for records." "No," Olivia said. "You were doing it for memory." The car made a slow turn past a block of brownstones, their windows glowing faintly in the early afternoon gray. She flipped the folder open, revealing the receipt he had signed weeks ago, cash payment, $4.75, along with a still image printed from the security footage. Maggie, mid-smile, mid-bite. Evan inhaled. "You were watching. There's a notice above the counter that says, 'Premises under video surveillance.'" "You didn't hide anything," Olivia said, matter of fact. Then after a pause, "But you didn't perform either." That mattered. She closed the folder, then finally turned to look at him. "That woman," she said softly. "The one sitting at table 3. That's my mother." Evan's eyebrows lifted, but he said nothing, just nodded once. "She hasn't been herself for a long time," Olivia continued. "She was brilliant once, sharp as glass, ran this neighborhood like it was her own kitchen. My father, he ran the opposite direction from everything she controlled. But once, just once, he sat down at a cafe table and she let him speak. Her eyes softened. That table, that pie, that cafe. It was their meeting place before it became my memory. It's the only place she ever returned to, even after the forgetting began. Evan listened, hands clasped, unsure if he was supposed to respond or simply witness. "So, why keep coming back?" Olivia asked aloud, more to herself than to him. Maybe she's chasing a piece of herself that only exists between those walls. Evan let the words settle. Then gently, "That's why I left the pie, in case that piece needed a place to land." She exhaled. The car slowed near the corner of Orchard and King. Outside, the rain had stopped but left a sheen on everything glass-metal pavement. Reflections everywhere. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia said the one thing that broke the silence in two. "Do you want your daughter to grow up in the dark? Like you did?" The question didn't come out harshly. It wasn't cruel, but it landed in Evan's chest like a small quiet explosion. He turned his head slightly, eyes fixed on the waterline streaking down the passenger window. His sleeve caught his attention, an old, stubborn smudge of paint just above the wrist. From a job months ago. Or maybe a year. He didn't remember. But he remembered why it stayed. He stared at it. Then, barely audible, he murmured, "I just want her to see the good things I couldn't hold on to for myself." His voice cracked not from weakness but from honesty, from the weight of things never said. Olivia didn't flinch. She reached into her bag again, this time pulling a single-page proposal typed neatly but clearly written by someone who understood more than budgets. It read, "Heart Urban Trust Community Renewal Initiative seeking compassionate hands to bring warmth back to forgotten places." She handed it to him without ceremony. "We're starting a program pilot phase, bringing heat meals, music, and humanity back to old community kitchens, nursing homes, rec rooms. Places that used to mean something before they were left behind." Evan ran his finger over the paper, careful not to smudge the ink. "We need someone who's seen both sides," Olivia said. "Someone who knows what it's like to be ignored and still choose kindness." He swallowed. "You want me to lead something, I want you to show up. The way you did for my mother. For strangers. For no recognition. Just show up." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded drawing, Maisie's newest one. Maggie, Evan, Olivia, and Maisie. 4 figures holding hands outside a building marked with a heart. He stared at it for a moment, then looked back at Olivia, and nodded. Not with words, not with bravado. Just a slow, steady nod, like someone lighting a candle quietly, reverently at the start of a long night. The first room smelled like boiled carrots and floor wax. That's what Evan remembered most. Not the welcome banner someone had half-taped to the peeling wall, not the dim, fluorescent lights that flickered every 3rd minute, not even the metal trays lined up on folding tables like a tired assembly line. No, it was the carrots. And wax. He stood near the back door of the old community center on 86th Street, sleeves rolled apron tied over his usual work shirt. It still had the faint bleach stain on the collar, a quiet badge of who he used to be. An elderly man shuffled past with a walker, nodding as he moved toward the line. Evan offered a gentle morning sir and stepped forward to help adjust the tray height on the table so the man wouldn't have to bend. No big speech, no grand entrance, just showing up like Olivia had asked. And something about that felt right. The program had no name yet, just a purpose: bring warmth, literal and emotional, back to forgotten rooms in forgotten corners of the city. The first 2 weeks were soft rollouts. Evan shadowed the site coordinators, prepped food, served plates, wiped tables, hauled boxes. But he didn't just serve. He listened. To a woman named Mrs. Chan who once taught 4th grade and still recited her students' names like a prayer. To a former doorman named Ray who hadn't spoken much in months until Evan noticed his cufflinks and said, "Those look like they've held 1,000 doors." to Marisol, who never ate the potatoes but always asked for extra gravy because it smells like home. Somehow, Evan remembered every name, every story. He began carrying a small notebook, just a pocket-sized one, nothing fancy. At the end of every shift, he'd sit in the supply closet or on a cracked bench outside and scribble a line or two. Mrs. Chan likes jasmine tea and stories about dogs. Ray played Sinatra when no one was looking. Marisol cried when the gravy reminded her of Christmas. He never said what the notebook was for, but he kept it close. By the third week, people had started to notice. "Hey, Cole," a volunteer called from behind a tray of steaming rolls one Thursday. "You know, we track attendance, right? Yours has magic. Numbers go up when you're here." Someone else chimed in. "You're not a janitor anymore, man. You're like a community whisperer." Evan just smiled, shaking his head. "As long as people stay longer than their tray time, I'm good." One of the interns laughed. "Your secret warm pie." "No," Evan said, tapping his chest lightly. "Warm ears. And that was the thing. He didn't fix people. He didn't preach or counsel. He just held space. And that made him rare." On April the 20th, while wiping down the counter in the kitchen of the Columbus Avenue Center, Evan overheard two sight leads talking near the doorway. "You hear about the building review on Orchard 1, said. The cafe spot." "Yeah. Word is there's a big meeting next month. Gonna decide the whole block's future." Evan's cloth stilled mid-wipe, maple and vine. He hadn't been back since the day Olivia asked him to ride with her. He hadn't needed to. That part of the story had felt paused, or maybe preserved. But now, it stirred again. He folded the cloth slowly, placed it on the edge of the sink, and stepped out into the side hall. Pulling out his notebook, he flipped past the scribbled lines and names and landed on one entry from weeks ago: Maggie, Table 3, apple pie, cinnamon steam, a chair that remembers. He stared at it for a long moment, then closed the notebook with care. Something was shifting, not just in his schedule, or his title, but in the city itself. And he had a feeling. The next time he walked back through the door of that cafe, the chair might not be empty, but the stakes would be far higher than just pie. The hallway to room 214 smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers, the kind that try too hard to be cheerful, the kind that never quite cover up the scent of time passing. Evan walked slowly, Maisie's hand wrapped tightly in his. Her little sneakers squeaked every few steps against the polished linoleum. In her other hand, she clutched a small paper bag stapled shut with a faint cinnamon scent slipping through. At the end of the hall, a nurse adjusted her clipboard and smiled gently. "She's been quieter than usual today," the nurse said softly, "but something seems different." Evan nodded, unsure what he'd find beyond that door. He had only seen Maggie Hart in the cafe, fierce, guarded, full of fire and absence. But here in this place where memory flickered like a faulty bulb, he wasn't sure what version of her waited. Olivia was already there, just outside the room, standing behind the glass. She turned when she saw them, a cautious look on her face. She's awake, more alert than usual. Evan kneeled to Maisie's level. "Remember what we talked about, honey. Be gentle and let her speak first." Maisie nodded. "I brought something," she whispered, holding up the bag. Then, quietly, they stepped inside. The room was still. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting soft gold across the bed and floor. Machines hummed gently. A small fan ticked in the corner, brushing air over Maggie's pale cheeks. She sat, propped upright, eyes open but unfocused. Her hands were folded in her lap, skin thin and fragile like paper that had been folded too many times. Maisie tiptoed closer. "Hi," she said. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Maisie. I brought you a pie." No response. Evan stayed near the foot of the bed, heart steady but uncertain. Maisie pulled the bag open and carefully slid the small wax-wrapped slice of pie onto the rolling tray. The cinnamon hit the air immediately, sharp, sweet, and warm. Maggie's nostrils flared. And then, something happened. Her fingers twitched, Her chin lifted, and her eyes clouded just moments before focused. She blinked, then again. Then, slowly, those tired eyes drifted toward the little girl. She stared at Maisie for a long, quiet beat. And then, my granddaughter? It wasn't a question. It wasn't a mistake. It was recognition. Maisie's face lit up. Evan's breath caught in his throat, and Maggie laughed. A soft, rasping, beautiful sound that cracked the silence like a sunbeam through a storm cloud. Maisie reached out and touched her hand. Maggie didn't flinch. Instead, her fingers curled around the small one in hers. Olivia stood frozen behind the glass, one hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling. Evan stepped toward her, pulled a tissue from his pocket, and offered it gently. She took it without a word. Through the glass, they both watched as Maggie leaned closer to Maisie, lifting the wax paper like a ritual. She took one bite, chewed slowly, and smiled. Later, as nurses checked vitals and adjusted the machines, Evan and Olivia sat just outside room 214 on a wooden bench that had been painted too many times. Neither of them spoke at first. Maisie had fallen asleep on Evan's shoulder fingers, still sticky from holding the pie bag. He adjusted her gently and draped his jacket over her legs. Inside, Maggie was humming to herself. It wasn't a tune either of them recognized, but it was something. After a long moment, Olivia whispered she used to hum that while doing dishes, before she forgot where the sink was. Evan looked over. She remembered Maisie. Olivia nodded. Her eyes still shimmered. For 5 minutes, maybe. But they were real minutes. He nodded slowly. There are some things memory can't hold, but the heart still keeps. She turned to him then. Not as the executive, not as the woman who owned half the city, just as a daughter. "Thank you," she said. Evan didn't reply. He didn't have to. When they finally left the care facility, the sky had shifted to late afternoon gold. Clouds parted just enough to let light kiss the tops of buildings. As Olivia slid into the back seat of her waiting car, her assistant handed her a small stack of unopened mail. She flipped through absently until one envelope made her pause. Stamped in black ink across the front, Hart Urban Holdings Board, Vote Proposed, Use Review. Maple and Vine Cafe. Meeting date, May 15th. Location, HQ, 10th floor boardroom. Her fingers froze over the edge of the paper. A decision, the kind that would ripple far beyond a vote count. She glanced back once toward the care center doors. Room 214 was on the second floor, just above the courtyard. And for a moment Olivia swore she could hear humming. The room was colder than it needed to be. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the walls, glass, and brushed steel-sharp corners, floor-polished like a mirror no one dared scuff. On the long table sat bottled water in perfect rows, stacks of briefing folders with the Hart logo embossed in silver, and 2 kinds of pens, one for taking notes, the other for signing decisions. Evan Cole stood at the end of the table, out of place in every way. No badge, no title, just a canvas messenger bag over one shoulder and his usual boots, the edges worn from years of overtime. But in his hand, he held something no one else had brought, a story worth fighting for. He placed his bag gently on the table and began laying out the pieces. The photo came first, a printed snapshot Olivia had helped him extract from security footage. Table 3. Maggie. Mid-smile, mid-bite. Steam rising from the plate. The warmth in her eyes undeniable. Then came the drawing crayon on thick paper corners, fraying from being folded and unfolded a dozen times. Maisie's careful strokes, Evan, Maggie, Olivia, and herself holding hands beneath a hand-drawn sign that read, Home. Next, a laminated napkin note. It read, "Thank you for remembering me when I couldn't remember myself." R. Calhoun Room 208, one of the residents from the community kitchen downtown. Evan had helped him find his favorite jazz station on the old center's radio last week. Then, last he pulled out a curled, water-damaged flyer. Proposal for property sale, Maple and Vine Cafe. The ink had bled from the first day Evan found it soaked under the cafe door, but it was still legible, still a threat. He set it down next to the smile, just as the door opened. Victor Reed entered with the kind of efficiency that made doors seem unnecessary. Pressed navy suit, a perfect Windsor knot, tablet in one hand, phone in the other. He stopped when he saw Evan, eyebrows lifted. "You're not on the briefing list?" Evan nodded once. "I'm not here for the list." Victor gave a tight smile, the kind people give to baristas who take too long with the change. "I see." He walked past, glanced down at the table. His gaze skimmed the photo, the drawing, the note. Then he picked up the soggy flyer. This is what you brought to a Capitol review." "It's part of it," Evan said calmly. "The rest is harder to print." Victor turned, arms folded. "Let me be clear. The cafe's location is underperforming. It's sentimentally charming, sure, but sentiment doesn't cover property tax. This isn't a family scrapbook, it's a portfolio." Evan didn't flinch. "Places like that cafe," he said, "hold more than leases. They hold people together. The pie, the laughter, the chance to sit somewhere and be seen. That's value. It's just not the kind you measure in quarterly earnings." Victor gave a small dismissive exhale. "And who decides what value counts, Mr. Cole?" "Evan Cole." Victor smirked. "Mr. Cole, you're a maintenance worker. You don't own that property, you don't fund it, and you certainly don't set the vote." Evan looked him straight in the eye. "No," he said, "but I've cleaned the floors where people leave pieces of themselves. I've seen what's forgotten. I've seen what gets remembered." He gestured to the drawing. "You call this child's art. I call it a blueprint for the kind of city we still could be." Victor glanced at the clock. "The board convenes in 5 days. We'll be deciding the cafe's future based on projections and land use studies, not crayon." He started for the door, then paused. Without turning, he added, "You'll have 5 minutes. If Olivia Hart insists you be present, then you speak, but keep it short." Evan didn't reply right away. Instead, he collected the drawing and note, folded them gently, and placed them back in his bag. Only then did he say, "I don't need 5 minutes of their time. I just need one moment where they remember what it felt like to belong." Victor didn't respond. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Evan stood alone again. The room hadn't changed. Same cold table, same bottled water, same indifferent skyline through the window. But something in the air felt different now. Not warmer, not safer, but ready. He took one last look at the photo of Maggie caught mid-smile at a place no spreadsheet could replicate and whispered under his breath, "Let the building speak. I'll just carry its voice." The room was built for silence. Not comfort, not warmth. Silence. The boardroom of Hart Urban Holdings had no soft edges, just glass stone and power. 12 leather chairs lined a sleek obsidian table. A digital screen glowed at the far end, already queued with revenue projections and property appraisals. The skyline behind it glittered with late-morning sun. And in the middle of it all, Evan Cole stood, in his only button-down shirt. No blazer, no title, no notes. Just a folded piece of paper in his pocket and a story in his chest. Around the room, board members murmured in low voices. Suits rustled. Tablets clicked. Olivia sat 3 chairs from the center, her face calm but unreadable. Victor was at the head of the table, tapping his pen in rhythm with the clock. Next item, he said, Proposal 7B, Maple and Vine Cafe, Orchard Street property. Redevelopment on the table. Final vote pending. He glanced toward Olivia, who nodded. Then, reluctantly, Victor gestured to Evan. "Mr. Cole, you've been granted 5 minutes. You represent community interest. Please proceed." Evan stepped forward, cleared his throat once, and began. "I'm not used to speaking in rooms like this," he said. "I usually mop them." A faint chuckle from the far corner. Quickly swallowed. Evan continued. "I don't have a presentation. I brought something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was slightly bent at the corners from being carried so long. He held it up. "This is Maggie. A few months ago she came to Maple and Vine every Tuesday. Same seat, table 3. She didn't talk much. Most people didn't talk to her." He paused, scanning the room. No one looked away. "One morning, the pie she always ordered hit the floor. Hot, sticky mess. She barked. I cleaned it up, and I brought her a new slice. Not because it was my job, but because that table meant something." He placed the photo down on the table gently. Maggie's memory isn't what it used to be, but something about that pie, about that cafe, held her. Even as the rest of the world faded, she found her way back there. He took out another item. Maisie's drawing. She's 6. This is what she remembers. An old woman, a warm plate, and 4 people holding hands under a sign that says, "Home." That cafe is one of the last places in the city that still feels like that. The room stayed quiet. Victor shifted slightly. "And your point, Mr. Cole?" Evan looked directly at him. "My point is this. When you sell that cafe, you don't just lose real estate. You erase a place where memory survives, where people who have nothing left to hold on to still hold on to something." He stepped forward now. Just a little. "The numbers will tell you it's inefficient, outdated, replaceable. But so is a family photo if you think about it long enough." He let that land, then said softly, "Don't ask a whole city to forget, just because a piece of paper says it's time to move on." A hush fell. Even the projector fan seemed to pause. Across the table, an elderly board member, white hair, bow tie, hands clasped, nodded slowly. Then, in a voice that cracked with age but rang with certainty, he said, "My wife hasn't remembered my name in 5 years. But every Thursday, she still asks for the blueberry muffins from the bakery we used to walk past. She remembers that smell." He looked around the table. "I vote we keep the cafe." Silence. Then a ripple of murmurs. A pause. A moment. Victor leaned back, sighing through his nose. Temporary preservation is on the table. 45-day pilot. Community use review. Olivia spoke finally. "Let's call it Phase 1, she said. Memory Cafe. If it fails, we revisit." Victor glanced around. No objections. Motion passed. Evan exhaled but didn't smile. Not yet. It wasn't over, but something had cracked. A wedge of light in a locked room. As the board moved on to the next agenda item, Evan gathered his belongings. He didn't notice Olivia watching him. Not until she spoke quietly after he turned to go. "That thing you did. The way you spoke. You didn't sound like someone who didn't belong here." He turned back, surprised. She didn't smile exactly, but the look in her eyes, open, unguarded, said more than words. She wasn't defending anything anymore. She was listening. And for the first time in weeks, Evan felt like something was beginning, not ending. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It hums quietly between people. Not the absence of words, but the presence of understanding. That was the space Olivia and Evan found themselves in after the vote. Not friends, not colleagues, not quite anything yet. But something had shifted. It began with Olivia's email the next morning. Subject line: Administrative adjustment. Community liaison. Oversight, inside a single sentence, to prevent any appearance of impropriety or bias. Mr. Evan Cole will now report to the Community Programs team under Sophia Mendoza, effective immediately. No explanation, no pleasantries. Just a clean, professional gesture, transparent above board. She had even CC'd her executive team. Evan read it twice, then nodded to himself. Clear lines, open air. That afternoon, Olivia bumped into him in the elevator. "I wanted it to be above board," she said without preamble. "I know," Evan replied. "It is." They stood in the small space, shoulders barely inches apart, both facing the door. When it dinged open, neither moved. Then Olivia smiled just slightly. Dinner. Evan looked over. with press releases or without. She laughed a real one, soft and unscripted, strictly off the record. They chose a place with no reservations, no dress code, no valet. A hole-in-the-wall Italian place in the East Village with dim lights, warm bread, and too many framed photos of customers long gone. It smelled of basil and history. They sat by the window, not across from each other, next to each other. It felt easier that way. Maisie had been picked up by a friend's mom for a sleepover. Evan showed Olivia a text that said, "Don't forget I like chocolate milk better than sparkling water. Tell your girlfriend too." He grinned as he put his phone away. "She's subtle," Olivia said. "She gets it from her dad." Their meals came quickly, but neither of them ate much at first. Instead, they talked. About Maggie, about Maisie, about the cafe, and then, slowly, about loss. Evan spoke first. "My wife passed during the second winter in our first apartment. We just bought a kettle we couldn't afford. She made hot cider every night for a month, said. It helped her pretend the heater worked." He smiled at the memory, but his eyes softened with it too. "She would have liked Maisie," he added. Olivia sipped her wine. "And the cafe. She would have called it a little miracle, the kind you walk past if you're not paying attention." He looked at Olivia. "You didn't walk past." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she folded her napkin once, twice, then said, "I'm good at deals, at pressure. I know how to fight for numbers, push for land, lobby for outcomes." Evan waited. She looked up. "But when it comes to people, when it comes to letting someone in, I negotiate myself out of it every time." He didn't interrupt her. The restaurant buzzed around them, glasses, clinking laughter echoing from a back table, but between them it stayed quiet. Comfortably so. Then Olivia said, barely above a whisper, "I'm great at building walls. Not so great at living inside them." Evan reached into his pocket, pulled out his little notebook. He flipped through a few pages, then stopped. "Read something aloud, Ray, from the Columbus kitchen," he said. "Every night I sit in the dark. Not because I have to, but because sometimes shadows are easier than facing the dust I never cleaned." He closed the notebook, then looked at her, his voice steady. "I'm not rich in light, Olivia, but I've got enough to hang a lamp." Her eyes softened just barely. Then, almost shyly, she said, "Then maybe I can help wire the rest." The words hung in the space between them like a hand extended in the dark. They didn't toast. They didn't kiss. But as they stood outside afterward, the breeze catching Olivia's hair and Evan rubbing the back of his neck in that quiet, unsure way, she reached for his hand. He let her. Their fingers met. No rush, no script, just a quiet touch like someone placing a bookmark in a story worth continuing. They both smiled, lightly, like the first breeze of summer. The rain had stopped just before dawn. By the time the sun broke over the rooftops of Hart Street, the cafe windows glowed gold with the promise of something returning, not quite new, not quite old, just remembered. Inside, the tables had been polished. The wallpaper had been left exactly as it was, faded floral and familiar. And on table 3, where the light always hit just right in the morning, someone had placed a small vase with a single white bloom. No card, no note, just grace. At 7:14 a.m., Olivia arrived. She wore no blazer, no makeup, just a soft linen shirt slightly wrinkled and her hair in a loose ponytail. Her heels clicked softly on the tiles as she stepped inside, breathing in the scent she didn't know she missed until that very moment. Cinnamon. Warm. Clean. Real. The bell over the door jingled behind her. Maisie came in right after, backpack bouncing paper clutched tightly in hand. "I made something," the little girl said. Olivia knelt beside her. Maisie gently unfolded the drawing and placed it flat on the polished wood of table 3. Crayons on printer paper. Nothing fancy. 4 figures drawn with careful lines, Evan, Olivia, Maggie, and Maisie holding hands as they walked through an archway. Above it, written in uneven pink letters, Home. Olivia stared at it for a long time, then looked up. Evan was standing by the counter watching quietly. He didn't say a word. He just placed a hand over his heart and nodded once. Olivia pressed her palm against the drawing as if to keep it still, as if to keep herself still. The city came slowly at first. One by one they arrived. Elderly couples with worn cardigans, a man with a military cane, a woman with 2 oxygen tanks and a smile that cracked her whole face open like dawn, caregivers who for once didn't have to stand, sons and daughters who just needed somewhere that didn't feel like a waiting room. Someone brought a harmonica. Someone else brought a thermos of black coffee and 2 packs of sugar just in case. At one point, someone opened the old upright piano in the back. A few tentative notes wobbled into the air off-key but brave. No one minded. Someone clapped. Someone wept. Evan moved gently among them all. He wasn't in uniform now, but he still wiped down a chair before someone sat. He still filled water glasses without being asked. And when a man with trembling hands spilled half a bowl of soup, Evan crouched and cleaned it with the same care he would use for a wedding ring. Maisie sat at the counter sketching again. She had drawn table 3 and labeled it Maggie's Place. A woman walked in mid-morning sunglasses pressed tight to her face. Her shoulders were hunched, her steps unsure. In her hand she held a pale blue scarf and a photo of a younger woman, her mother. Evan came over gently. The woman didn't speak. She just shook her head and gestured helplessly toward the older woman seated by the window, her mother, who refused to eat. "It's been weeks," she whispered. "She won't even lift a spoon." Evan nodded. He stepped behind the counter, picked up a small white bowl of applesauce laced with cinnamon, and returned. Then, without words, he sat down beside the older woman. He placed the bowl in front of her, folded a napkin, set the spoon just right, waited. The old woman looked down, sniffed, paused, and then she reached. The spoon trembled in her hand, but she brought it to her mouth. The daughter gasped, hands to her face, tears already falling. Evan said nothing, just slid a folded napkin across the table. A soft tissue. The woman took it, clutching it like it was breath itself. Behind the counter, Olivia watched. She was standing beside a framed piece of paper hung quietly on the wall. Maisie's drawing. They'd mounted it in oak. No plaque, no announcement. Just there. For anyone who needed to remember why places like this still mattered. At the end of the day, the crowd thinned. A hush settled over the cafe, not heavy but full. Full of what had been shared. Full of what had been made possible. Evan stepped outside to take down the temporary paper sign taped to the front window. Maisie ran to him, grabbing his hand. "Daddy, wait." He paused. She reached into her backpack and pulled out another drawing, this one newer. Same figures, same doorway. But this time, others were behind them. Strangers and neighbors all smiling. Some old, some young. All walking together. Maisie whispered, "This one's for the next window." Evan looked at her, then knelt down and kissed her forehead. He taped it up just beside the door. Below it, Olivia hung a small wooden sign she'd had carved the week before. It read simply, Memory Cafe. Grand Reopening. June 20th. The paint wasn't dry yet, but the welcome already was. The door swung open with a soft jingle, not the kind of grand opening that called for balloons or a podium, just sunlight pouring in across the floorboards, and the scent of cinnamon already curling through the room like a promise. Maisie stood on tiptoe by the window, carefully peeling away the tape from the temporary reopening soon sign. Evan knelt beside her, folding the paper slowly. "She did it," Maisie whispered. He looked at her. "Who?" "Miss Olivia." She grinned. She kept the promise. Evan didn't answer. He just tucked the sign away into the worn pocket of his coat, the same one that had once carried a little girl's wooden spoon and a rain-damp proposal to shut this place down. Now the cafe was full of light and people. Soft chatter hummed in the background chairs, slid napkins unfolded. Someone set up a tiny easel in the corner offering to draw 5-minute portraits. Another tuned a violin softly near the window. Laughter bubbled up from a booth where 3 elderly friends reunited after years apart. But table 3 remained untouched, waiting. Olivia arrived just after 10. Her blazer was off, her shoes were sensible, but her presence calm, grounded radiant turned heads anyway. Not because she was the CEO, but because today, she wasn't. She was just a daughter, a witness, a keeper of memories. She moved through the space quietly nodding to the volunteers helping refill water carafes, wiping a small syrup stain from the corner of a table with the side of her thumb. At table 3, she paused. The plaque had been mounted just beneath the window, small and carved in soft script, for those who remember, and those who don't. She ran her fingers along the edge, then exhaled slowly and turned. Room 214 had sent word earlier that morning Maggie was having a good day. Not a perfect one, but one of those rare golden days when names were lighter to carry and eyes didn't glaze over the faces of those she loved. And just before noon, the door opened again. Evan looked up from the counter. Maggie entered with help from a nurse and a scarf tucked neatly at her collar. Her gaze swept the cafe once and landed on table 3. She smiled. Olivia stood frozen. And then Sweetheart Maggie said softly, reaching out, "You're smiling like I used to." Remember, Olivia's breath caught. For a second, she looked like a little girl again, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with wonder and fragile hope. She crossed the room and fell to her knees beside her mother's chair. "Yes, Mama," she whispered, voice trembling. "I remember." They sat like that for a while. Nothing dramatic, no audience needed, just a daughter, a mother, and time briefly holding still. Evan appeared at her side with a plate. On it a slice of pie, still warm, steam curling up like a whisper. "Thought this might belong here," he said. He set it down gently on table 3. Maggie looked at it, closed her eyes, and murmured, "That smell." Olivia chuckled through her tears. Still cinnamon. Maggie reached for the fork without help, took a bite, and then laughed a sound so soft and bright that every head in the cafe turned without meaning to. Maisie clapped once, purely on instinct. No one knew what to say, so no one said anything at all. They just smiled, because sometimes silence is the only container strong enough for joy. Later, after the rush had settled and the dishes were stacked in gentle piles and the violinist had packed up, Evan found himself standing behind the counter again. He wasn't wearing an apron. He wasn't anyone's employee, but he was home. Olivia joined him, a cup of tea in her hands. "Maisie wants to make a weekly sketch wall," she said, "for customers to draw something they remember." Evan smiled. "She's got a good heart. She gets it from her father." He looked at her. Olivia glanced away, cheeks pink. "Well, I help a little." They stood side by side watching Maggie talk to a young nurse who hadn't seen her so lucid in months. "I used to think success was scale," Olivia said suddenly. "Mergers, expansion, going public. And now I think it's making room." She looked at him. For people to come back to themselves. Evan was quiet, then nodded almost to himself. "The world needs more of that." She raised her cup. "To memory." He tapped his water glass against hers. "To light in old places." At the front door, just as the last guest stepped out, someone hung a new sign below the hours of operation. Simple script, no logos, no branding. "Welcome back." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "We're still here." Because they were. No one talked about profit margins or future grants or who owned what, because this wasn't about titles anymore. Just 3 people, a child, and a memory that didn't fade. It had been made visible, kept alive, set on a table for others to taste. After 45 days, the cafe remained open to the community. Other formalities would follow. What mattered most was this: the doors had opened. Sometimes the kindest places are not the grandest. Their quiet corners, a warm slice of pie, a hand that remembers yours even when the mind forgets. If you've ever witnessed a moment like this where love outlasted logic or someone held on to hope for just one more day, we'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. We've seen friends from Scotland, the Philippines, Ohio, Melbourne, and maybe today we'll hear from you too. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you pause, smile, or remember someone you love, please consider subscribing. There's always another story waiting to be told, and we'd be honored to share it with you. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Until next time, stay kind and keep the light on.